I'm Warren, a virologist at the Galveston National Laboratory, and my life used to feel like a well-calibrated experiment, predictable, controlled, with results I could trust. My wife, Jocelyn, and I have been married for 8 years, working side by side in the lab, chasing viruses like dengue and Zika. Galveston's our home, a humid, salty island where the Gulf breeze carries both promise and unease. We met in grad school, bonded over late-night slides and bad coffee, and built a life together, no kids, just us and our work. I thought we were solid, like a perfectly sequenced genome. But looking back, I missed the early mutations, the subtle shifts in her behavior that should have tipped me off. It started small. Jocelyn, always the more outgoing one, began staying late at the lab, claiming she was double-checking data. I didn't think much of it, we're both obsessive about our work. But then came the distracted glances, the way her phone glowed at odd hours, her quick swipes to dismiss notifications when I walked by. She'd laugh it off, saying it was just lab chatter or a friend from her old running group. I bought it because I wanted to. We were a team, after all, partners in science, partners in life. I didn't question the late-night texts or the way her smile felt rehearsed, like she was running lines for a role she didn't quite believe in. Then came the Argentina trip. The World Health Organization tapped us to join a team in Buenos Aires, researching a nasty dengue outbreak. It was a big deal, high stakes, international collaboration, a chance to make a dent in a global health crisis. We packed our bags, flew south, and set up in a humid lab in Palermo, surrounded by tango bars and jacaranda trees. The work was grueling, 16-hour days analyzing mosquito vectors and viral strains. Jocelyn thrived in the chaos, her energy electric, while I buried myself in data, trying to keep up. But something was off. She'd vanish during breaks, claiming she was grabbing empanadas or scouting local contacts. I'd find her hours later, flushed, her eyes darting away when I asked where she'd been. I chalked it up to stress, the heat, the pressure. But deep down, a quiet alarm started blinking, a hypothesis I didn't want to test. One night, in our cramped rental apartment, I caught her whispering into her phone, her voice soft, almost tender. She hung up fast when she saw me, muttering something about a colleague needing protocol clarifications. Her hands shook as she poured mate, the bitter tea we'd both come to tolerate. I didn't push her then, but the air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I started noticing other things, her perfume lingering on lab coats she hadn't worn, the way she'd linger near Diego, an Argentinian virologist on our team, their laughs too easy, too private. I told myself it was nothing, just cultural differences, just my imagination running wild. But the truth has a way of bubbling up, no matter how hard you try to cap it. That was the first crack in the foundation, the moment I started to wonder if the life we'd built was just a petri dish waiting to show contamination. It was our first day off in weeks, and I was itching to get out of that stuffy Buenos Aires apartment. The dengue project had us chained to the lab, and I figured Jocelyn and I could use a breather, something to reconnect us. I suggested a walk in Tres de Febrero Park, this sprawling green oasis in Palermo with lakes and rose gardens, the kind of place that screams romance if you squint hard enough. Jocelyn's eyes lit up, and for a second, I saw the woman I fell for, bright, eager, game for anything. "Sounds perfect," she said, tossing her auburn hair into a loose bun. I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe we could outrun whatever was pulling us apart. We planned to head out after breakfast, but half an hour later, she was clutching her stomach, face pale. "I'm not feeling great, Warren," she said, sinking onto the couch. "Maybe something I ate." "You go ahead, I'll just rest." My gut twisted. I didn't want to leave her like that. "I'll stay," I said, already reaching for the kettle to make her some tea. But she waved me off, her voice firm. "No, don't ruin your day off because of me. I'll be fine alone. Just need to sleep it off." Her insistence stung, like she was pushing me out the door. I hesitated, but she gave me that small, tight smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "Go," she said. So I did, grabbing my jacket and heading out, telling myself she just needed space. The park was gorgeous, sunlight dappling through eucalyptus trees, couples rowing boats on the lake, the air thick with jasmine. I wandered the paths, trying to shake the unease gnawing at me. I wanted to believe her, I wanted to trust that she was just sick, but those late-night phone calls, her disappearing acts, Diego's too familiar grin, they kept circling in my head like a bad hypothesis. About an hour in, the sky turned ugly fast. Dark clouds rolled in, and a sharp wind kicked up, followed by a downpour that sent people scrambling. My walk was done. Soaked and frustrated, I trudged back to the apartment, hoping Jocelyn was feeling better, hoping we could salvage the day. I pushed open the door, expecting to find her curled up on the couch. Nothing. The apartment was dead quiet, her shoes gone from the entryway, her phone not on the charger. My chest tightened. I called her cell, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. My pulse started hammering, anger mixing with something sharper, something like dread. Where the hell was she? She was supposed to be resting, not out gallivanting while I was dodging raindrops. I paced the tiny living room, the walls closing in, my mind spinning through every clue I'd ignored, her distracted looks, the way she'd linger with Diego over lab notes, their shared glances that felt like a language I couldn't read. Fury burned through me, hot and raw. I wanted to call again, leave a message that'd make her flinch, but I stopped myself. Confronting her now, half-cocked and pissed, wouldn't get me answers, it'd just give her room to dodge. I needed to know more, to catch her in the act, not just fling accusations. So I grabbed my keys and stormed out, heading to a dingy bar a few blocks away, one of those hole-in-the-wall spots with sticky tables and tango music crackling through old speakers. I ordered a Fernet and cola, the bitter local drink that matched my mood, and sat in a corner, watching the rain streak the windows. My phone stayed silent. No texts, no apologies, just the hum of betrayal settling in my bones. I wasn't ready to face her yet, but I knew one thing, whatever I'd been holding onto was starting to slip through my fingers. I got back to the apartment around 7 p.m., the rain still hammering the streets of Buenos Aires, my shoes squelching with every step. The bar had done little to dull the edge of my anger, just left me with a bitter aftertaste of Fernet and a headache from the tango music looping in my skull. I half expected Jocelyn to still be gone, but the soft glow of lights spilled from under the door. I pushed it open, and there she was, lounging in the bathroom, sunk deep in a bubble bath, the air thick with lavender and steam. Her auburn hair was pinned up, a few damp strands curling against her neck, and she flashed me a smile that was all warmth, like nothing had happened. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice smooth as honey. "Missed you. How'd your day go?" I stood there, dripping wet, my jaw tight as I took in the scene. She was playing it cool, pretending she'd been here all day, like I hadn't come back to an empty apartment hours ago. Like I hadn't called her phone and gotten nothing but voicemail. My blood boiled, but I swallowed it down, keeping my face neutral. "The walk was fine," I said, shrugging off my soaked jacket. "Rain like hell, though." "Cut it short." I didn't mention coming home, didn't let on that I knew she'd slipped out while claiming to be resting. I wanted to see how far she'd take this act, how deep the lie went. She tilted her head, bubbles clinging to her collarbone, and gave me that look, soft, inviting, like she was trying to pull me into her orbit. "Poor thing, you're soaked," she said, pouting slightly. "Why don't you join me? The water's still warm." I forced a tired smile, shaking my head. "Long day. Just need to crash." Her eyes flickered, a hint of frustration, but she didn't push it. Instead, she stood, water cascading off her, and stepped out of the tub, grabbing a towel but not rushing to cover up. She dried off slowly, deliberately, then slipped into a lace negligee that clung to her curves like it was painted on. The fabric was sheer, leaving little to the imagination, and she stretched languidly, arms above her head, arching her back like a cat waking from a nap. "Pour me a glass of wine, would you, love?" she purred, her voice low, teasing, her eyes locked on mine. It was a move straight out of a playbook, seduction to smooth over whatever she thought I might suspect. My stomach churned. She was beautiful, no question, her body glowing in the dim light, but all I could see was the lie behind it. The way she'd vanished today, the unanswered calls, the way she'd been cozying up to Diego in the lab. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders, demand where she'd been, who she'd been with, but I couldn't, not yet. I needed more than a hunch to confront her, something solid to pin her down. So I played dumb, yawning as I kicked off my shoes. "I'm beat, Jocelyn," I said, my voice flat. Wet, tired, and done. "I'm hitting the sack." Her face faltered for a split second, a crack in her performance, but she recovered fast, tossing her hair with a little laugh. "Suit yourself," she said, sauntering to the kitchen to pour her own wine. I didn't watch her go. I stripped off my damp clothes, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling, the hum of betrayal louder than the rain outside. She thought she could distract me, make me forget with a sultry glance and a glass of Malbec. But I wasn't that guy, not anymore. I lay there, heart pounding, knowing the truth was out there, waiting for me to find it. And when I did, there'd be no going back. The next morning, the air in our Buenos Aires apartment was thick with tension, heavier than the humid Gulf mornings back in Galveston. I woke up to Jocelyn slamming drawers in the kitchen, her movements sharp, deliberate, like she was trying to wake the neighbors. I dragged myself out of bed, my head still foggy from last night's anger and the restless sleep that followed. She was already dressed for the lab, her white blouse crisp, but her face was a storm cloud. "You know, Warren," she started, not looking at me as she poured coffee, "you could at least pretend to notice me. I tried to make last night nice, and you just shut me down. Do you even see me as a woman anymore, or am I just your lab partner now?" Her words hit like a jab, and I froze, gripping the edge of the counter. She was flipping the script, making me the problem for not falling into her seduction routine, as if I hadn't caught her lying about where she'd been yesterday. I wanted to snap back, to throw her absence in her face, how she ditched the apartment, ignored my calls, probably ran off to meet Diego or whoever else she was tangled up with. But I bit my tongue. My evidence was thin, just a gut feeling in a silent phone, and I wasn't ready to tip my hand. "I was tired, Jocelyn," I said, keeping my voice even. "It wasn't about you." Her eyes flashed, hurt and fury mixed together. "That's the problem, isn't it? It's never about me. You don't appreciate what I do, what I give up to keep this marriage going." I could have laughed at the irony, her talking about sacrifice while sneaking around, but I just shrugged. "Let's not do this now. We've got a big day at the lab." She huffed, grabbing her bag, and we headed out, the silence between us louder than the Buenos Aires traffic. The lab in Palermo was buzzing when we got there, the team gearing up for a critical push on the dengue vaccine. We were testing a new candidate, a make-or-break moment that could shape the whole project. Focus was non-negotiable, but Jocelyn was off her game from the start. She fumbled a pipette, contaminating a sample, then mislabeled a set of vials, basic mistakes she'd never make on a good day. I caught her staring at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen like she was waiting for a message that never came. Our boss, Dr. Marquez, a no-nonsense Argentinian virologist, didn't miss it either. "Jocelyn, get it together," he barked after she spilled a reagent, his voice cutting through the hum of centrifuges. "We can't afford this today." Her face flushed, and she muttered an apology, but her eyes darted to me, like I was supposed to jump in and save her. I didn't. I couldn't. My own work wasn't much better. I tried to lose myself in the data, analyzing antibody responses, but my mind kept replaying yesterday, her empty spot on the couch, the unanswered calls, the way she'd stretched in that negligee like nothing was wrong. Every time I looked at her across the lab, bent over a microscope, I wondered what else she was hiding. My hands shook as I loaded samples, and I had to redo a titration twice because I kept screwing up the math. The betrayal I suspected was a fog, clouding every thought, every move. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was drowning in it, the shock of her possible affair hardening into something sharper, something that felt like grief. I loved her, God, I still did, but the woman I thought I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone I couldn't trust. By the end of the day, we were both ragged, our work sloppy, our team frustrated. Marquez pulled me aside, his brow furrowed. "Warren, you and Jocelyn need to sort out whatever's going on. This project's too important for personal drama." I nodded, but inside, I was reeling. The lab, our marriage, my whole damn life, it was all starting to feel like an experiment gone wrong. After that brutal day at the lab, Jocelyn and I dragged ourselves back to the apartment, the Buenos Aires dusk heavy with heat and unspoken resentment. She'd barely spoken since Marquez's reprimand, and I wasn't in the mood to bridge the gap. We ate takeout empanadas in silence, the kind of quiet that feels like a prelude to something worse. Around 9 p.m., Jocelyn started shivering, her face flushed, her hands trembling as she pushed her plate away. "I don't feel right," she mumbled, pressing a hand to her forehead. I touched her skin, she was burning up, a fever spiking fast. My virologist brain kicked in, running through possibilities, dengue, Zika, or just some random bug from the city. I gave her ibuprofen in a cool cloth, but by midnight, she was worse, her breathing shallow, her eyes glassy. Panic clawed at me. This wasn't just a stomach bug from yesterday's act. I bundled her into a taxi and rushed her to Hospital Fernandez, the nearest ER, her head lolling against my shoulder. At the hospital, chaos took over. Jocelyn was barely conscious, her fever spiking to 103, and the staff whisked her away for tests. I sat in the waiting area, the fluorescent lights buzzing, my heart pounding with a mix of fear for her and the anger I still couldn't shake. A nurse handed me Jocelyn's belongings, her purse, her lab ID, her phone. I clutched them, my mind racing. Was this dengue? Something worse? We worked with dangerous viruses every day. One slip in protocol could be catastrophic. When I mentioned our work at the Galveston National Lab and the dengue project here, the doctor's face tightened. We're running tests, but given her exposure, we're moving her to quarantine, he said, his voice clipped. You've been in the same lab, so we're isolating you too, just to be safe. I protested. I felt fine, no fever, no symptoms, but they weren't taking chances. They led me to a sterile room down the hall from Jocelyn's, a glass window separating us from the world. Quarantine was a cold, lonely purgatory. I sat on a stiff cot, staring at Jocelyn's phone, which I'd kept with her things. I hadn't meant to snoop, but it buzzed at 6 a.m., the screen lighting up with a text from a contact labeled Ed. My stomach dropped. I knew no Ed in our lab, no Ed in our life. Against every instinct screaming to stop, I opened the message. I'm not leaving my wife, Jocelyn, it read. I've got 3 kids. I never promised you anything serious. Please don't call again. The words hit like a punch, knocking the air out of me. Ed. Not Diego, the flirty virologist I'd suspected, but some other guy, someone with a wife and kids, someone who'd been close enough to Jocelyn to break her heart. My hand shook, shock giving way to a raw, searing pain. Was this Ed another chapter in Jocelyn's secrets, or a new one entirely? I stared at her through the quarantine glass, unconscious, hooked to and and felt my world crack open. The woman I loved, the one I'd built my life around, had been living a lie, and I'd been too blind, or too stubborn, to see it. Anger surged, hot and sharp, but it was tangled with fear for her, for us. Was she sick because of our work, or was this some cosmic punishment for her betrayal? I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she was out cold, and I was trapped in this sterile cage, her phone burning a hole in my hand. The shock of that text, the casual cruelty of Ed's words, left me reeling. I'd suspected something, but this was proof, undeniable, like a positive test result staring me in the face. My chest ached, not just with betrayal but with the weight of losing her, not to some virus but to a truth I couldn't unsee. I loved her, God help me, but how do you love someone who's been giving pieces of themselves to someone else? I sat there, alone in quarantine, the hum of the hospital machines drowning out my thoughts, knowing nothing would ever be the same. The quarantine room felt like a tomb, the air thick with antiseptic and the weight of that text from Ed. I sat on the cot, Jocelyn's phone still in my hand, its screen now dark but the words seared into my brain, I'm not leaving my wife. I never promised you anything serious. My mind churned, replaying every moment of the past few weeks, her late nights, her evasions, the way she'd pushed me away yesterday. I was still grappling with the betrayal when a doctor in a hazmat suit interrupted, his voice muffled through the mask. Mr. Ellis, we have preliminary results for your wife. His tone was clinical, but there was a hesitation that made my stomach lurch. Her fever's likely dengue, contracted outside the lab, probably a mosquito bite. We're treating it aggressively, but there's something else. She's 5 weeks pregnant. The word hit like a sledgehammer. Pregnant. 5 weeks. My brain did the math before I could stop it. I hadn't touched Jocelyn in over 2 months. The Argentina trip had been all work, no intimacy, her always too tired or distracted. It wasn't me. It wasn't Diego either, the flirty virologist I'd been fixating on. He'd been on a field assignment in Mendoza until last week. This was someone else. Ed. The guy with a wife and 3 kids, who'd just told her to back off. My world didn't just crack, it collapsed, the pieces scattering like shattered glass. Jocelyn, unconscious in her quarantine bed, had no idea I was unraveling. For 8 years, she'd been adamant, no kids. I want to focus on my work, on us, she'd say, her voice firm, her eyes bright with ambition. I'd agreed, happy to build our life around the lab and each other, no diapers or school runs to complicate things. I thought we were on the same page, a perfect team. But now, staring at her through the glass, her face pale and serene, I saw the lie for what it was. She didn't want kids with me. With Ed, though? She'd risked everything, our marriage, her career, her health, for a man who didn't even want her. The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the future she'd chosen without me, the one she'd hidden while pretending we were still a unit. I gripped the edge of the cot, my knuckles white, anger and grief clawing at my chest. I wanted to hate her, to let rage burn away the love I still felt, but it wouldn't. I kept seeing her laugh in grad school, her hands steady under a microscope, the way she'd lean into me during late-night data sessions. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who'd carried on a secret life, who'd conceived a child with a man who'd discarded her. Divorce wasn't a question anymore, it was a necessity. I couldn't stay with someone who'd lied so deeply, who'd built a wall between us while I was busy loving her. The thought of her carrying another man's child, of her choosing that over our life, was a knife twisting deeper with every breath. I sat there, trapped in quarantine, the hospital's hum a cruel backdrop to my thoughts. Jocelyn might recover from the dengue, but our marriage wouldn't. I'd loved her with everything I had, but love can't survive a truth this brutal. I didn't know who Ed was beyond that text, but he'd taken everything, my trust, my future, my wife. And Jocelyn? She'd let him. I stared at her phone, the weight of it heavier than ever, and knew I'd walk away, no matter how much it hurt. The life we'd built was over, and all I could do was brace for the fallout. After 2 days in quarantine, my test results came back clean, no dengue, no trace of anything else. The hospital discharged me, but Jocelyn was still out cold, her fever stubborn, her condition teetering. The doctors said she might pull through, but dengue can be a beast, and her pregnancy complicated things. I left the hospital in a daze, the Buenos Aires streets blurring past as I took a taxi back to our apartment. The place felt like a ghost town, her shoes by the door, her coffee mug unwashed in the sink, all signs of a life that now felt like a lie. I couldn't stay there, not with her phone burning a hole in my pocket, Ed's text still looping in my head. 5 weeks pregnant. Not mine. Not Diego's. But I needed to know more, to piece together the full scope of her betrayal. Diego, the smooth-talking virologist who'd been circling her in the lab, was my next step. I tracked him down after work, catching him as he left the Palermo lab. "Diego, got a minute?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, though my pulse was hammering. He raised an eyebrow, his dark eyes wary, but nodded. "Sure, Warren. What's up?" I suggested a pub nearby, a dimly lit spot called La Cerveceria, where the clink of glasses and murmur of locals might make this easier. Over cold Quilmes beers, I leaned in, trying to keep my voice steady. "You and Jocelyn, you've been close, right? I'm not blind. I've seen the way you two talk, laugh. I need to know what's going on." Diego shifted, his fingers tightening around his glass, his usual confidence faltering. "Close? We're colleagues, man. You know how it is, long hours, tight team." I wasn't buying it. His hesitation was a tell, and I was done with half-truths. I leaned closer, dropping my voice. "She's in the hospital, Diego. Dengue. She might not make it." His face paled, his jaw going slack, and I saw it, guilt, raw and unfiltered. I pressed harder. "If there's something to say, now's the time. I deserve the truth." He took a long swig of beer, then exhaled, like he was letting go of a weight. "All right, Warren. You want it straight? She came on to me. First week we got here, she was flirty, all smiles, brushing my arm when we worked. Said her marriage was on the rocks, that you two were more like roommates. I didn't push, she did. Asked me out for coffee, but it wasn't coffee she wanted." My stomach churned, but I kept my face blank, nodding for him to go on. He looked away, his voice low. "We met at this diner near the lab, El Gaucho. Didn't even make it through the meal. She pulled me into the bathroom, locked the door, and, well, you get it. It was quick, messy, right there against the sink. She said it was a one-time thing, that she needed to feel something. I didn't argue. Didn't see her like that again, but she kept it friendly, like nothing happened." He met my eyes, almost apologetic. "I didn't know she was playing me, man. I thought you two were done." The world tilted. Not just Ed, but Diego too. Jocelyn, my Jocelyn, had been unraveling our marriage piece by piece, chasing thrills while I was buried in data, thinking we were a team. I felt like I'd been gut-punched, the air sucked out of me. I didn't say a word. I just stood, left my beer half-drunk, and walked out of the pub, Diego's voice trailing off behind me. The Buenos Aires night was humid, the streets alive with music and laughter, but it all felt distant, like I was underwater. I got back to the apartment, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a storm. Jocelyn in a diner bathroom with Diego, pregnant with Ed's kid, lying to me for years about kids, about us. Every memory of her smile, her touch, felt tainted now, like a slide contaminated in the lab. I lay there all night, eyes burning, heartbroken, knowing I'd lost her long before she got sick. Divorce was my only way out, but even that felt like too little, too late. The dengue project was wrapping up, the lab in Palermo humming with final data runs and reports. We'd made solid progress on the vaccine candidate, enough to call it a win, but it felt hollow to me. I was ready to get the hell out of Buenos Aires, back to Galveston, where I could breathe without the weight of Jocelyn's lies pressing down on me. She'd pulled through the dengue, but the hospital stay had taken its toll. She lost the baby, Ed's baby, at 5 weeks. The doctors said it was the fever, the stress on her body, and when they discharged her 3 days later, she came back to our apartment looking like a ghost of herself, pale and fragile, her auburn hair limp, her eyes hollow. I hadn't left yet, though I'd booked my flight. I needed to face her, to close this chapter before I could start over. The truth was a virus in my blood now, and I couldn't leave it untreated. Jocelyn walked into the apartment, dropping her bag by the door, her movements slow, like she was carrying more than just physical exhaustion. I was at the kitchen table, her phone sitting in front of me, that damning text from Ed still burned into my memory. She saw it and froze, her eyes flicking to mine, searching for what I knew. Before I could speak, she launched into it, her voice soft but calculated, tears welling up. "Warren, I'm so sorry about the baby," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. "I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. I know we said no kids, but when I found out, I thought, maybe it could have brought us closer." She stepped toward me, her eyes pleading. "It was yours, you know. Our baby." Her words were a punch, not because I believed them, but because she thought I was that gullible. I leaned back in my chair, my jaw tight, and slid her phone across the table. "Don't, Jocelyn," I said, my voice low, steady. "I know it was Ed's. The hospital told me you were 5 weeks along. We haven't been together in 2 months. The math doesn't lie, even if you do." Her face crumpled, the act slipping, but she tried to hold it together, shaking her head. "Warren, no, you're wrong. It was," I cut her off, pulling the phone closer and unlocking it, Ed's text glaring up at us. "I'm not leaving my wife. I never promised you anything serious. Sound familiar? You left your phone with me in quarantine. I saw everything." I paused, letting it sink in. "And that night in the negligee? You weren't trying to reconnect, you were trying to cover your tracks, make me think we'd been close enough for it to be mine." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't for me, they were for the mess she'd made, the life she'd lost. "Warren, please," she whispered, reaching for my hand. I was scared. Ed was a mistake, a stupid fling. "I love you. I didn't want to hurt you." I pulled my hand back, the touch burning like a betrayal. "You didn't just hurt me, Jocelyn. You broke us. You lied about wanting no kids, about being all in with me. You wanted a spark with Ed, with Diego, hell, who else? And you let me believe we were a team." Her sob caught in her throat, but I kept going, my voice cold. "You slept with Diego in a diner bathroom, told him our marriage was done. You were pregnant with Ed's kid, planning to pass it off as mine. How do you come back from that?" She sank onto the couch, her face in her hands, but I felt no pity, only a raw, aching emptiness. "I'm done," I said, standing. "I'm filing for divorce when we get back to Galveston. You can keep the apartment, the lab life, whatever you want. I just want out." Her head snapped up, panic in her eyes. "Warren, no, we can fix this. I'll do anything, therapy, whatever you want." I shook my head, my heart heavy but resolute. "You can't fix what's already gone. I loved you, Jocelyn, but I can't live with someone who's been living a lie." I grabbed my suitcase, already packed, and walked to the door. She didn't follow, just sat there, crying, as I stepped into the humid Buenos Aires night, the weight of 8 years lifting and breaking me all at once. I left Buenos Aires with a one-way ticket to San Antonio, Texas, a city big enough to swallow me whole and far enough from Galveston to keep Jocelyn's shadow at bay. The dengue project was done, our vaccine candidate sent off to the WHO for trials, and I needed a fresh start. I transferred to an independent research center in San Antonio, a sleek facility focused on emerging pathogens, where I could dive into work without the ghosts of the lab in Palermo, or Jocelyn, haunting every corner. I rented a small apartment in Alamo Heights, a quiet spot with hardwood floors and a balcony overlooking a courtyard. On a whim, I adopted a scruffy tabby cat from a local shelter, naming her Petrie for the petri dishes that had been my life for years. She'd curl up on my lap while I read journals, her purring a small anchor in the chaos of starting over. My neighbors were a surprise, a warm, eclectic bunch who made San Antonio feel like home faster than I expected. The couple next door, Maria and Carlos, invited me over for homemade tamales on my first weekend, their kitchen loud with laughter and stories of their kids' soccer games. Across the hall, an older widow named Rosa insisted I take cuttings from her herb garden, her smile crinkling her eyes as she told me to live a little and try her cilantro in my cooking. They didn't know my past, didn't ask about the ring I no longer wore, and I was grateful for it. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, like I was more than the guy whose wife had torn his world apart. San Antonio was my clean slate, and I was determined to rebuild, one day, one experiment at a time. Back in Galveston, Jocelyn was struggling, or so I heard through a mutual colleague who'd stayed in touch. She'd gone back to the National Laboratory, throwing herself into her work, but the spark she'd always had was gone. She tried to reach out to Ed, desperate to cling to something from her past, but he'd vanished, moved to Florida with his wife and 3 kids, new job, new life, leaving her with nothing but his cold text. She was alone, surrounded by the same lab equipment, the same salty Gulf air, but weighed down by ghosts, Ed, Diego, me, the baby she'd lost. Our colleague said she looked hollow, her focus slipping, her laughter forced. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was a dull ache. She'd chosen her path, and it had led her to a dead end. Looking back, I learned that love isn't enough to hold a marriage together, not when trust is shattered, not when lies pile up like contaminated samples. Jocelyn's betrayal taught me to see people for who they are, not who I want them to be. I loved her fiercely, but I was blind to her flaws, to the cracks in our foundation. If I could tell anyone going through this hell, it'd be this: don't ignore the signs, the late-night texts, the excuses, the gut feeling that something's off. Face the truth, even if it breaks you, because staying in a lie is worse than starting over. I'm not whole yet, maybe I never will be, but with Petrie purring beside me in a new city to call home, I'm learning to live again. The past still stings, but it's fading, like a fever finally breaking.